Hello and welcome to today's segment of Holistic Toolbelt Chats. I'm Cara Ockendon of Soul Healing and I'm a relationship breakdown and divorce coach with over a decade experience in family law. I am super passionate about empowering individuals to navigate their pathway through separation and divorce in a way that really instills confidence, allows them to walk the path of least destruction and impart the least negative toll, and lastly, to create a future dynamic for their new family in a way that really supports them and their new family dynamic to thrive. I'm so conscious as I navigate this journey that I'm only one piece of the puzzle. I bring a really holistic and conscious lens to my approach. And with that, I also thrive in supporting my clients and audience by connecting to others who allow them to really create this new family life for themselves and implement any new structures and agreements that they're wanting to put into place. So with that, that's what the segment's all about, is supporting my client and audience to other individuals who may support them. And today I'm really excited to be introducing Jason Bluett. Jason is a transformational coach and the founder of the movement Primal Men Project. His movement was founded on the principle that as human beings, we're living a really long way from our intended design. Through his retreats and transformational programs, Jason is helping men to tap into their evolutionary origins and really helping them to lead happier, healthier, and more fulfilling lives. I'm quite familiar with Jason's work. We came into a connection a couple of months ago, and I was really inspired about the work he's delivering to the world and how he's supporting men to move through and generate happier lives for themselves. And I really see a great place for him to work with men who are moving through separation as well. So with that said, I'm very delighted to introduce you to Jason. So Jason, again, thank you so much for being here this morning. It's such a pleasure. I'd love you to just firstly share a little bit with us about who you are, a bit about your background and, what you do.
Amazing. And you're welcome. Great to be with you.
Thank you.
A bit about who I am. So my name's Jason Bluett. My profession, I suppose, as I would describe it, I'm a men's coach. I'm a facilitator of men's work, and I'm the founder of a men's movement called Primal Men Project. And I've been running this movement for the last 5 years as my full-time profession. I'm a dad. I have a 16-year-old son. I'm divorced. I am based in Brisbane, and that's probably a good start. Yeah, that's about me.
Thank you for sharing that. So I understand you haven't always been a men's coach. So what's been sort of your journey to get from A to B?
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe it's more like A, B, C, D. So, yeah.
There's a few letters on the way.
Yeah.
So I did university in business and law, so a dual degree. I was raised being told that I was daddy's little lawyer. I was pretty pedantic and detail orientated, and would argue. We'd go past the bakery, and my dad would say, "Smell the bakery," and I'd say, "No, Dad, you're smelling the bread." So this kind of quality of pedantic, detail orientated meant that I received the program and the guidance pretty early from my dad that I should go and study law. So followed the program very dutifully and went off and did business and law. And what was interesting is that while I was studying, in parallel, I would always find myself in jobs where I was involved with people. So I ended up working in retail, ended up working in sales. I was a sales rep. While I was studying, I was getting flown around the country working for this company I was doing sales repping for. So my path was kind of parallel business, sales, and marketing, and then this study in law, and eventually went out into the job industry and didn't fit very well in the mold for law firms. That was not a vibe.
I hear you.
Yeah.
I'm hearing a very similar story here, to be honest.
Yeah, I think I was a bit too colorful. I didn't play the game, let's say that. And I ended up working in the mining industry for big construction and engineering companies. And where I landed was I got into contract management. So I would help to negotiate, release tender packages for big construction projects or contracts, and then I would negotiate and I would sign the deals and then manage those contracts to get performed. So in that world, it's called contract management or supply chain. And yeah, I found a really good niche. It's a bit of my law background, a bit of my business background, and I had to do a lot of relationship management with people and project management. So that was the majority of my career. Spent about 10, almost 15 years in that world, and then ended up in this area called business improvement. So where I finished my professional career, the last time I wore a long sleeve shirt and shiny pointy shoes to an office, I worked in a business improvement role where I would help big infrastructure and mining companies to improve different ways that they were operating, their safety, their environment, and their business performance. So in that job, my job essentially was take people from a point A to a point B, point A being not ideal, point B being more ideal. And that was the business objective. But what I realized was, on a micro level, what I was actually doing was helping people to change their behavior, because people ultimately needed to do the thing that had the business improve. So I found a very complementary skill set when I eventually transitioned into men's work and personal transformation.
Wonderful. So it's quite a colourful skill set back and that you have in there. Now,
everything was necessary, and I didn't realize until afterwards. Every bit of what I learned and studied was going to be critical for me to do what I do now.
Yeah, and it's funny the way that works, really, because sometimes you don't see it at the time, but it all has its purpose and gets you to be perfectly skilled to be performing what you're doing now in your men's work, both in 100%. Terms of, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I could only connect the dots looking back.
Wonderful. So when you came to men's work, I'm going to assume that's not something you always did. It's not something that's been super well known amongst men generally, in my understanding. It's something that's in my sphere now, but for a lot of men, it's not in their sphere. So eventually, somewhere along the way, you've landed in that space. How did that happen?
So I was married young, married at 23, father at 24, and was divorced a couple of years after. I had a pretty challenging marriage. I was married to a woman who was quite mentally unwell. She had a number of different, mental illnesses, bipolar, eventually schizophrenia, manic depression, and we had a pretty challenging, conflict-driven relationship, and eventually we divorced. I didn't have the skills, the tools, the awareness, or the self-responsibility to, deal with that whole experience very well. So jumping straight out of my marriage, I took on some pretty destructive coping strategies. When I got married, Tinder wasn't a thing. By the time I got separated, Tinder was a thing. Yeah. So I went pretty quickly into, I guess, looking for comfort in connecting with women, and developed some pretty destructive strategies around that. I bounced between multiple rebound relationships, if you want to call them that. No disrespect to those women. And eventually those relationships got shorter and shorter and shorter and more sort of dysfunctional, until I got to the third, what I called crazy ex, and realized that the common denominator was me. And a couple of people independently recommended that I should go along to a men's work event, which was a men's initiation rite of passage. And I took that as a sign, went along to my first men's work event in May of 2018. And I found a puzzle piece that I never knew was always missing for me. And I believe now for all men, and just made a deal at that time in that experience of just like, fuck, okay, this is incredible. Everybody needs this. And I'm going to do whatever I can to be involved in this to whatever level I can contribute. So that was really the change, the fork in the road.
Yeah, wonderful. And look, I mean, that's my experience. It's very common in terms of, going down that pathway when you move through the marriage breakdown, and the way, I mean, people tend not to do it well. That's just reality. People tend to go a bit destructive before they then come back around and see the light. But what I also know is that if people had the right tools and resources at the time, well, then their pathway may be a little bit less destructive till they get, or be a little bit less protracted to get from the point of, okay, here's the conflict, here's the dysfunction that I'm experiencing as a result of this crumbling, this world falling apart, and my nervous system not having capacity to deal with that, and me not having the skills or resources to deal with that because no one ever gave them to me. And that's the reality for most people. and then having to go through that journey to find them. But that's where I feel like there's such benefit in terms of the work that you do as well, is that if you get people at that right time and the right crutch, then they can be led to you in that pathway, well, then it's the opportunity for them to have that growth and expansion and that learning much more quickly, with much less damage and much less toll on their own life, and potentially on their loved ones as well, because that's what happens as well as we move through breakups and the like. Our inner conflict and trauma gets passed on to them. That's how it works. Unfortunately, that's just collateral damage. So with that said, what do you actually offer your men now? How do you support them? Tell me a little bit about your work. I know we've spoken about this before, but I'll let you share into it.
Yeah, perfect. So Primal Men Project was founded around this principle that the root cause into a vast majority of men's challenges in this modern Western world are caused by a mismatch between the way that we were evolved to live and the way that we currently live. And that doesn't mean we need to go back to being hunter-gatherers or go back to living in caves or living on the savannah. But there are some core things that men need, and I think human beings need generally, but I work with men, that we can reinstall back into men's lives to have them supported and essentially live happier, healthier, and more fulfilling lives. And how I describe my work is I fulfill on 3 core pillars. One is power, one is purpose, and one is pack. Power is essentially having a man fully alive in himself, accessing all parts of his body, his mind, his heart, and his soul, and being balanced in his ability to express all those parts of himself. And when he's in balance, when he's accessing all of those parts, he's a powerful man. When he can be compassionate, but also driven. When he can be focused, but also playful. When he can be present and connected with his loved ones, but also be clear and assertive with himself and his boundaries. When he can be devoted to himself first and then devoted to being in service to his family and his loved ones, but also able to rest and recreate and enjoy the experience of life and be at peace within himself. When a man can access all those parts of himself, he's able to be sustainable in how he moves forward. So that's what we talk about as power. And where we explore that is on our 3-day retreat, which we call the Spear, which is at its core a men's initiation, a men's rite of passage, which in our ancestral times and in Indigenous communities around the world, they still offer to boys. But given that we live in a world that's very different to that, men often don't have an opportunity to understand what it is to be a man in a clean masculine environment, healthy, supportive masculine men, and then to make a choice to embrace all those parts of himself. So that's what we do on the 3-day retreat. We call the Spear. The second piece of work I do is around helping men find purpose. So in our ancestral times, men would have had a very important role to contribute to not just their partner and children. They would have had to contribute to the tribe. And all of our neurochemistry and all of our physiology is designed to have us feel good when we contribute to something meaningful. And a lot of men make their purpose their paycheck. And that has them in an experience where they get the wife, the car, the house, the kids, the holiday once a year, the white picket fence. And then they say, well, I've got all the things that society told me I should want, but I feel like there's something missing. I feel like I'm asking myself this question, what's this all for? So that question, that existential question, is something that can be answered by discovering how you can be of contribution and how you can be of service to not just your family, but to humanity, but to your community. So that's purpose. And we run that through an online program that we call The Path, which is really about helping man find his ultimate trajectory of where he wants to go in his life and what he wants to leave behind. The third piece is probably most important, and what puts my work in a little bit of a distinction, a little bit of a different category, is pack. We were designed to be social animals. Men specifically, I think, are in a bit of a pattern in this modern confused world of thinking and believing they need to do it all on their own. And the reality is, once again, our entire neurochemistry, physiology was designed to get reinforcement, to get positive neurochemistry and chemical feedback from other people, and specifically from men while they pursue something meaningful. So we have a number of different online and in-person programs that essentially help men to connect with that good group of, values aligned men and then be in service to something bigger. So
Wonderful.
that's our 3 core pillars: power, purpose, and pack, through retreats, online programs, and community.
Yeah, wonderful. And that's, I understand, like, it is an incredible initiative that you have, and I can see how there's a lot of value for all men in general, but also I can particularly see how there's a lot of value for men that I particularly work with, and they're moving through that space of moving through the relationship breakdown, feeling very lost, lacking purpose, often feeling like the whole world has crumbled. Sometimes like they've lost everything. Sometimes depending on the way that things went, whether they were the departer or even at the same time, even if you are the departer, sometimes it still feels that way. Just because you made the choice to do it doesn't mean it was your ideal choice or ideal outcome. No one goes into a marriage thinking, yeah, this is what I want at the end of the day, that I want it to end up in a divorce. And ultimately the world that you had dreamed for yourself is crumbled, and it puts you into a space of not having necessarily a purpose or identity. Or for some people, if you're like yourself, you may resonate with this, is if you started with someone very young, you never actually developed your own identity outside of yourself. You came straight from home, straight into your relationships, and then you never had that part of development where you developed yourself. So there can be this existential crisis, so to speak, as to what now, whilst you're still dealing with all the chaos at the same time, which is extremely chaotic, like you say, biologically, physiologically, all the stuff that's going on for both parties and children moving through that breakdown. There's a lot going on. So
and I just want to jump in and speak to that point briefly. Like that was my exact story. So I made my family and my career my purpose, and then when that family dissolved in the way that I had it, it was like the rug was pulled out from underneath me, and I didn't have anything beyond that. I didn't have community. I didn't have clear identity in the sense of understanding who I was as a man, or what my values were, or what I stood for, or how I was going to operate in life. And then I didn't have essentially something to motivate me. So when a man doesn't have deeper purpose, generally speaking, he'll seek pleasure. In the absence of purpose, a man seeks pleasure. And that's what I did. And in the absence of power, a man will essentially stay still. There won't be a forward trajectory. And in the absence of a community, man will be in this phase we call the lone wolf. And there's this, I think, popular misconception of lone wolfing it, or monk mode. A lot of guys see this personal development work around put your head down and work hard. And there's a romanticizing of this lone wolf character, the Sigma. The reality is, in nature, the lone wolf doesn't survive. And if I had had a community of men when I was going through the challenges that I had in my relationship, maybe my relationship might have succeeded. If I could see very clearly that relationship was dysfunctional and not supportive for me, and if I had a community of men in my corner, I could have exited that relationship, 1, more gracefully, and 2, had better behaviors and support systems on the other side to make sure that I didn't end up where I did. But that's part of the lesson, and part of what I do is to provide men the thing that I didn't have.
And I love that, because that's one of the core things that I speak into with all my clients, that real need to have that community and have that support. Because if you don't have that, it's very challenging to regulate, for one, because we need connection to regulate and feel balanced and supported. And it in that space, like you said, the lone wolf, it's the way I put it, it's like being in a car crash and you're underwater and you're just drowning and there's no way out. Like, you have to get out and get that help in order to help the family unit that's also in the bath, and to do that gracefully and in a way that's going to be most supportive, obviously for children, very importantly. But also, most people don't wish to inflict harm upon their person that they're separating from. I mean, that's not what most people want to do. And having gracefulness and compassion in the process is something that could be of benefit to all, but it's not accessible to all because of the chaos that they're going through. So, I love that that's what that you offer that. And, ideally in the first instance, in a space where you can support men to not have to go through that process, right? Maybe it can help them maintain their relationships, but in the event that they are making that decision to part ways, there's a lot of value there for you to support them. Mm. And so in that regard, do you tell me a little bit about the men you work with? What kind of men are you working with? Who's coming to you? Are you working with men in the breakdown space? So your kind of men that you work with.
Yeah. There's the kind of men that I would love to work with if I could choose it. And then there's the kind of men that end up in my work. And I'll share a little bit about that. So I really love to work with men who are already into personal development. They've already done some work on themselves. They've discovered that there's something here in this world of, personal growth, and they want to be around really high performing men so they can make a bigger impact in their lives and in the world. And then they can create a life that they love. I essentially help men to live life by their design. And that there's two meanings in that. Live life by their design means aligned to their evolutionary design. And then live by their design means by their choosing. So where do you want to live? How do you want to live your life? Who do you want to be? And how do you want to create a life that you love? So the men that I love to work with are already successful in a number of domains in their life. Generally speaking, they'll be business owners or professionals who've done a good job of building wealth. They've got families, and they've recognized that they want to get better. They want to become better leaders in their home. They want to become more connected, passionate partners, and they want to improve their life and relationships with their families and their kids. That's where I see I'm able to help men to thrive from already achieving. What I do notice with men, and I think this is a feature of society or how men are built, men tend to go until something breaks. And they tend to bear the heavy load of life and responsibility of fatherhood and parenthood and all that stuff until something breaks down. And it's generally relationship breakdown, or they get a come to Jesus moment with their partner who says, I'm either going to leave or you're going to change, or you need to step up. This is not working. There's generally some external event that creates this moment of crisis. And it doesn't necessarily mean that a man is at the bottom of the barrel, but there's some wake up call. It might be a health crisis. It might be, business breakdown. It might be, relationship coming to an end or getting close to an end. And generally it's that wake up call that initiates a man's decision to change. Something about his life needs to change. What I would love to be able to do is to get out in front of that and help men to be proactive, to improve where they are in their life before things get to that place. That's what I would love.
Yes. No, I love that. And that's, like I said before, that is the ideal. Now, if I can speak a little bit more into that. So if I am thinking about my clients who are already, unfortunately, beyond that space mostly, they're already in the space of breakdown, separation, usually in the thick of some sort of conflict or trying to come up with some solutions for their new family structures, whatever that may look like financially, with children, and invariably there's conflict in that process. In what ways would you then say, that you would work with them?
I work with a lot of men in those situations. They come to a place where the life that they had is no longer possible, and they are in a position of almost saying that they have to rebuild from scratch. They've gone either through the financial separation already, or they're in the process of separating, and they're looking at life on the other side, and they're asking themselves the question, what do I actually want? What do I want my life to look like? Often these men have lived in service to or tried their best to be devoted dads and fathers and partners, and they realize actually this life wasn't really what I wanted. The life in the way that it eventuated wasn't really what I needed. And so men who are in that spot have the advantage of saying, okay, we're going to build from scratch. What does that look like? So the work I do with men is to help them essentially redesign what their ideal future scenario, what their future life wants to look like according to their own values and what they desire. Some men want to go and have massive impact in the world and build social movement impact, projects and have millions of people impacted. Some men want to go and build a property and live on the land. and have community. And, we get everybody from both ends, and anything in between. The next piece I see for men in that situation and how we serve them is that there is a process of deep reflection and deep self-responsibility of how did I get here? What were the patterns and behaviors? What were the beliefs and the conditionings that had me arrive in a relationship or create a relationship that didn't work for me? What can I be responsible for? What are my behaviors as a man? I'll give you a couple of examples. A lot of men I work with put their family first, put their wife before themselves. They put their business before themselves. They have this happy wife, happy life philosophy. And eventually they get to a place where polarity and intimacy in their relationship breaks down because they're being essentially nice guys, putting everybody else before themselves. They don't have boundaries. They don't say no. And eventually they realize they need to actually prioritize themselves, and they need to start setting more boundaries. They need to take more responsibility at home. They need to take, a leadership role in their relationship. And I know you and I have pretty aligned views on that, but it can be pretty challenging for men to really confront the fact that taking responsibility, accountability, and leadership in their home and in their relationship is something that a lot of men today are not doing. And downstream of that can often be resentment from partner, a lack of contribution from a man, feeling like he just leaves his woman to deal with and manage everything at home and manage the family. And then, and then he wonders why everything breaks down. Well, there's a lot of things we could go into around that. But for me, having a man take responsibility for himself, how he's showing up, and then helping him to redesign where he wants to go in his life next, supported by a good community of men. Those are the things that we do to help a man when he comes to this crossroad of relationship separation.
Yeah, wonderful. And I'm going to touch on a couple points there, but before I want to ask you a bit more about polarity because people don't understand it. But before I do, I just want to touch on what you're speaking into there in terms of, bringing in that self-responsibility, because it's a lot of what I do as well. It's about looking at yourself and where you can take back your power and not be in a disempowered state as you're moving through the relationship breakdown and taking responsibility for, your 3% or your part in things and your part in the ongoing, whatever conflict is continuing within that dynamic because you haven't dealt with, what was there to begin with. And for me, what I understand through my own journey, having been down that path myself as well, like yourself, is that, you'll see things at the beginning, but then there's always deeper layers. And there's always ways, yes, at the beginning you may see some things, but then sometimes it takes a bit of time and doing additional work to get a lot deeper and take that fuller responsibility. And that's certainly been my journey with myself in first self-reflection, but then having to work with other coaches and the like in the women's sphere as well to fully see those, what I would call those really shadow parts are a little bit gnarly. They're not so nice to look at. It's not nice to see the ways that we haven't shown up in the way that we thought we were. And
my ex was a narcissist. I don't have any responsibility for anything that I did. It's not my trauma and my wounding.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the story. That's the story I was telling myself.
Yes.
Those crazy exes, and they were telling the same story. So they were like, I'm a narcissist, and I was like, they're a narcissist, and then we end up doing these ones, and no one actually changes, and nothing improves.
No, that's right. And then you say lock hold in that conflict. But so much can shift once you start to take those little pieces of responsibility. And that's certainly been my journey with my son's father as well, in terms of just through me being more responsible for the way that I was showing up, like dynamics shifted massively. And that is really, I think, the power of self-responsibility, right? And also, bringing what I call the unconscious to the conscious and bringing the consciousness into it and consciously creating those new dynamics that are going to allow you to really thrive, as opposed to, unconsciously working for your life and letting society tell you what you need to be doing and how you should be doing it and what it should look like for you. And that's what's going to work for you and your family, when the reality is we're all quite unique. We're all living in a very different world to what we were even 10, 15 years ago. And for a lot of us, we're doing it without tribe. And I think that's an incredibly important aspect as well, is bringing in that aspect of community and tribe for a lot of families who are so isolated. I mean, your family may be 45 minutes away, but you're still very isolated in terms of support and things like that. So I think that's incredibly valuable. That said, now, I wanted to go back to that point that you mentioned about polarity, because for people who don't know what that word means, because I know myself, probably 3 years ago, I did not know what that meant. So perhaps you could speak a little bit into that.
Yeah. The idea of masculine and feminine polarity comes from essentially the metaphor of magnetism. You've got a positive pole and a negative pole. That's what creates attraction. And it talks about a whole area of personal development that teaches the principles around magnetism between men and women and how you can create attraction, chemistry, and ultimately, more compatible connection in relationship, because it's the magnets of the positive and negative connect. Tangibly, and this has lots of different flavors. You'll have lots of different teachers who will say very, very different things in the work of polarity, and it's becoming a very popular realm. I mean, my lens that I see this through is that the masculine as the positive pole, the feminine as the negative pole, represent different core attributes or traits that are inherent within a majority of men and women, as men identifying as men and women identifying as women, in a heteronormative context, that men have core traits and qualities that are inherent in our physiology. There's a whole huge, range of different research that demonstrates these different behaviors from birth and from the first times we can actually interact. And I'll give you a really classic example of masculine and feminine polarity. There was a study done with infants where they had a mother and there was an obstacle in the way, and they had female babies and they had male babies. And the female babies, when trying to get to the mother, when facing the obstacle that would prevent them from moving through, would stop and cry. They would express their emotion. The male babies would get to the obstacle and then they would climb over, bash it down, fall over, try again, stumble over the obstacle, and ultimately were more likely to get to mum by solving the problem. And this is a good example of an inherent quality that when faced with difficulty, the feminine pre-orientates to expressing their needs and their emotions as a signal for help, or as a signal for this is what I'm experiencing. And the masculine, when they face a problem, they're much more likely to want to fix it, which is, men are from Mars, women are from Venus, classic old school stuff that you learn about in the basic relationship textbooks. When women share, most often, not always, but most often, their desire is to be heard. When men face or hear that in terms of a problem, their orientation is to fix it. So, that's a really simple example of, a principle that might underpin a polarity teaching. Men desire to fix, women desire to be heard. And if we understand those two things, that we can have more functional and more connected relationships when men don't try and fix women, and when women understand that men desire to fix.
Thank you for clarifying that. I think that's really helpful, and I think it was a really clean explanation of what could be a complex topic for people who haven't understood it or come across it previously. And for me, I see a lot of value in terms of the way that we communicate and how we can bring more consciousness and groundedness to that communication and the like through our discussions. And there is a lot of value in, for people to consider that as something that they may look into on their journey at some point post-separation, depending on where they're at and what aligns for them. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that coming up in the conversation. And so you've spoken into your retreats and your tribe now, and also your online programs.
Yeah.
Is there any other ways that you're supporting men at present or looking to?
Yeah, we have a retreat coming up. Depending on when you're airing this, it may or may not be relevant, but we've got a retreat coming up on the 27th of February, which is our next 3-day men's retreat. It's in Queensland. We run it just outside of Brisbane, about an hour and a half outside of Brizzy. We have an online program that we run a weekly call. It's called The Forge. It's about helping men to build foundations of a stronger mindset, building momentum towards the things they love in life and want to create, building mateship with other men, and then creating mastery in the key areas of their health, wealth, and relationships. And that's accessible from anywhere in the world. We've got, 50 men from all over Australia dialing in once a week to help themselves and help each other to achieve their goals and improve their lives. We have another program online we call the Roundtable, And that's where we, as men who've discovered purpose, cooperate, collaborate, co-create different business partnerships, helping each other essentially to thrive in the context of creating purpose-driven businesses. So, yeah, a number of different programs and offerings. The best thing for a man to do if he's listening to this is to reach out and have a conversation. If any of the things that have resonated here, are attractive, we have a conversation and find out if there's something that we can do to help.
Absolutely. No, thank you for that, and I appreciate that. And I suppose the last thing I'll just ask you if there's any sort of tips that you have. Especially probably spoken into what men need in terms of tips for how they can support themselves moving through a breakup, is really through adopting those 3 core principles or poles. I'm not quite sure the word that you actually used, but
advice for men going through separation. There are some core ways in which our life and society and the way that we live are unsupportive to relationship breakdown. If a man is going through a breakdown and he wants to do it in a way that is more harmonious and less conflict driven, he needs to start by examining himself and examining his own personality, positives and negatives in how he has contributed to where he is, and the work that he may choose to do on building what I call the core archetypes. So when we talk about a man's power, and we spoke about it before, there's a Carl Jung, which is a famous psychiatrist and philosopher, teacher, created these masculine archetypes: the king, the warrior, the lover, and the magician. If a man is embodied...
Can I get you to repeat that? Because I think the audio just cut out briefly. So could you repeat that?
So the 4 masculine archetypes Carl Jung created or identified were the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover. And these essentially represent the core pillars of who we are as men, the key aspects, key qualities. King being the mind, the warrior being the body, the magician being the soul, and the lover being the heart. So the man who is cultivated and developed in all these 4 areas, that's a balanced and a successful man. So if a man is going through a relationship breakdown, examine those parts of yourself, who you are as a man and how you're showing up. Find something bigger than yourself and your current challenges that you're focused on working towards. And if that's life on the other side of your separation, understanding it may be chaotic and challenging, and you're putting out fires and you're in court, or you're dealing with in Kara's programs to help you have a harmonious, non-legal battle kind of separation. But if a man has something that is looking to the horizon to focus on, it can help him not being focused on his feet. So when a man's focused on his feet, he feels like he's not making progress. He's getting stuck. He's sort of stumbling over what's here. If you're focused on the horizon, it can feel a lot more. It can feel a lot more inspiring. It can feel like there's hope and there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Absolutely.
And the third key piece for me around PAC is, if you are going through this experience of separation and you don't have a community specifically of men who can relate and resonate with your situation and with your challenges, not a place where you can go and whinge about your ex, not a place where you can go and just complain and hang shit. So we're not talking about men at the pub that can just basically enable you in your victimhood. I'm talking about responsible, personally developed, emotionally intelligent men. And if that resonates for you, we obviously have a community that is as I've described. But if that doesn't resonate, there are a number of other men's communities around, and it doesn't take much to look for them online. So look at yourself and your own responsibility. Find something to focus on that's out toward the horizon of what you want your life to look like on the other side of what you're dealing with, and find a community of men.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And I was going to add something there about I've lost it, but in terms of you're speaking into your vision, and that's so incredibly important, because that's something I work with as well, with people moving through separation, because they feel quite dire. And also encouraging people to hold a vision that may feel unattainable at the end of the day, particularly when you're speaking about separation and breakdown. A lot of people get that victimhood, say it cannot be this, that it can only be what it is now. It can only be this conflict. And having that vision where you can say, well, look, I can actually envision maybe there is a space in the future where it's not like that. And maybe, I'm this way and they're that way, but it's not like it is now. And that's so important to hold on through when you're moving through that breakdown. Otherwise you could feel like, completely disempowered and helpless. And we don't need helplessness in that space. There was something else I was going to say about community, and now I've lost it. So I might leave it there. If I think of it, I'll come back to it. But other than the fact that it is incredibly important, and like you say, if you're, I think it's quite lacking for men, particularly, women will always have their more likely to have their girlfriends and stuff that they go out to and seek support from, as opposed to men. And I think the other thing you touched on, having men who are responsible and emotionally intelligent and not going to let you sit in your victimhood is important, right? Otherwise you're going to be stuck. So thank you for bringing it up.
If a man wants to be involved in my work, he needs to understand that we hold a standard of self-responsibility. We don't have what we call a crying towel, where, men sit around in their problems and wallow. Important to express what you're experiencing, 100%. Important to kind of get it off your shoulders, absolutely. Hey, I'm dealing with this right now, and this is what I'm feeling about it. Good, express, and then okay, what are you going to do about it? And that's a key distinction in my work compared to, let's say, I don't want to make disparagements to other men's work, but there can be an experience of men's work where men just talk and then they come back and they continue to talk. For me, men's work and my work specifically has talk, express, share, relate, resonate, and then take action and be held accountable to taking that action. One thing to say what you're going to do. It's another thing to then be challenged by a group of good men to say, hey, you said you were going to get that done. How'd you go? And that's a core, I think a core principle of masculinity is healthy challenge and healthy accountability, which is something that I think a lot of men don't have. I certainly didn't have. And when I wasn't being held accountable for my behavior, how I was showing up in my separation, how I was showing up in the post-separation relationships, there was nobody there to hold me accountable to say, hey man, what are you doing? It's not working for you. And thank fuck, the man who was a friend of mine who recommended the men's work event, he actually said that to me. He goes, bro, what are you doing? All this Tinder stuff, these relationships, it's like you're making a mess. He's like, don't do that. Stop.
Love that. You got to have a good friend sometimes, right? A good, well-meaning friend who can, knock you across the head a little bit.
Yeah, and just, the words he said is, mate, what you're doing is not working for you.
Yeah.
And in the absence of that, a lot of men continue to go by default, and they just continue doing what they're doing until something breaks. So if that's something that's missing in a man's life, highly encourage him to find it or reach out to us. Yeah,
wonderful. Now, is there any last words that you're wanting to share here? Where can people find you? I know you're on Facebook, but where else?
Yeah, so Facebook and Instagram and YouTube, Primal Men Project. We've got some great masterclasses on YouTube that teach about a lot of the ideas and principles in our work. And Facebook and Instagram, you can find the more short form content. And then I'm going to share a link here. I'm hoping, Cara, you'll put in here in my link tree.
Yes, I will.
Yeah, men can put in an application to have a chat with us. And that just looks like a landing page that shows a bit more about the work that we do and what we provide. And if it's something that resonates, then a man can book in to have a chat with me. It's a 15-minute phone call to find out very quickly what's missing in his life, where are the gaps, how we might be able to help him close that gap if it's something that he's interested in, and then what it would look like for us to do some work together. And whether that's in the online or the in-person programs, how we might be able to help him, become essentially the man that he wants to be.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Jason. It's been such a pleasure to have you offer your time with us today and to my audience. And I'm sure there'll be incredible value for those who come across and are aligned to listen. Predominantly men, I'm going to assume, but maybe some partners who, I don't know, maybe not the right space for referring your ex-partner to a men's coach perhaps may not go down so well. But
look, if it's coming from a place of care and genuine interest to support a man, saying, "Hey, I saw this." If a woman's listening and she wants to refer her ex-partner and she believes that he'll be open, share from that place of, "I saw this. I thought it might be of interest to you, and I wanted to share it with you," and then leave it there. I think there's a challenge, I think, that happens with men and women's dynamics, especially in relationship breakdown, where there's disempowerment and emasculation that can happen from women to men. No judgment about that, but offering it as an invitation is how I would recommend that happen.
Yeah, thank you for that, share. And I totally agree with everything you just said there about even going from the emasculation to and trying to control that dynamic, thinking you have to do this. And if you come up from that space where it's like you need to do this, or there's going to be consequences, basically, because that's where it's going to come from. That's not the right place to come from. And yeah, I like the way that you express that. And certainly I have shared in that manner with my son's father a few times. At the end of the day, it's for a person to be ready to take that path at the end of the day, and they've got to make that choice in themselves.
Yeah.
And yeah, if it's aligned, it's aligned.
Yeah.
But yes. All right. Well, I will leave it there for today. But again, thank you so much. Most appreciate it. And I'll let you know when it's uploaded.
Amazing. Thank you, Cara.
Thank you.